Tyler Reddick here from 2311 Racing. Another checkered flag for the books. Time to celebrate with Chumba. Jump in at ChumbaCasino.com. Let's Chumba.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See T&Cs. 21 plus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
If you work in university maintenance, Grainger considers you an MVP because your playbook ensures your arena is always ready for tip-off. And Grainger is your trusted partner, offering the products you need all in one place, from HVAC and plumbing supplies to lighting and more, and all delivered with plenty of time left on the clock, so your team always gets the win. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, visit Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Season 7 of Sun Coaches Podcast is proudly brought to you by Titan Sensor. Season 7. That was my number in high school, so maybe this will be lucky for us, but we'll see. You know, I've learned over time that when somebody's talking about something you really don't want to talk about, you just can always throw in there, hey, I knew this guy once, and then just pretty much make up whatever you want to, and they won't listen to it. They'll get off track, and you don't have to talk about the uncomfortable thing anymore. Coach, like we do every week, tell everybody where you grew up and where you're from. Sun Coaches Podcast, where not everybody has a funny story, but everybody has a story. Hope you enjoy Season 7 of Sun Coaches Podcast. Sun Coaches is proud to partner with Titan Sensor for Season 6 and 7. Titan is made in the USA, proudly founded and based in Texas. When you connect with Titan, you are not alone. You can collaborate and share templates with other coaches across the country to build reports and foster competition. Used by programs such as State 6A Georgia State champion Grayson High School, Titan can tailor a package to fit your needs. The eye in the sky never lies. Improve your team's performance with Titan. This is Podcast Season 7, and I'm fired up to be joined by one of the premier offensive line coaches in the state of Georgia. He's at Calhoun High School. Coach Caleb Bagley, thanks for being on with me.
Yes, sir. I don't know about Premier, but I appreciate it. I'm just a guy that tries really hard.
Well, Coach, where did you grow up and go to school?
So I grew up in Chatsworth, Georgia. My dad was a pastor, so we moved, a few times growing up from the time I was born, but we really settled into Murray County about the time I got to middle school. So that was, that's kind of where we consider home. Grew up there, lived there until I moved off to go to college and attended Murray County High School back when there was just one high school in the county. There was no North Murray High School at the time. It was just Murray County High School, and got to play for Coach Bill Napier, who I think is really well known and well thought of around the state, and had a great experience growing up there, small town, and, was a part of some, it's a very successful program back in that time period for sure.
Well, I got to meet him when I first got into coaching, and my favorite was Coach Ziegler that was with him.
Yep.
Forever. And Coach Z, I loved that dude. He was awesome. You could just sit down and talk to him, and he would take time with a young coach, and he'd answer any questions you had, get on the board if you wanted him to, and I really appreciated that back then.
Yes, he was my ninth grade football coach, so know Coach Ziegler very well.
So what all did you play in high school, or were you just a football guy?
Well, I played kind of everything growing up. And then, when I got to high school, that's really when my ninth grade year, I kind of just fell in love with football. And back then, the GACA weightlifting competitions were kind of still going strong. And, like we had a lot of players that played basketball and some that did, baseball, but there was a large majority of us, we played football, and then, it was straight into lifting season for us. So we lifted year round, but, we would come in and have extra stuff after school. So really the only, true sport that I played in high school was football. But, it was also during a time where we all had jobs. Everybody I went to school with, it seemed like had a job, whether it was, at the rec department mowing and weed eating, or, at the grocery store unloading trucks and bagging groceries. So really, just football was kind of it.
So did you have an opportunity to play at the college level, or did you just go to school to go to school?
No, I did. I played and graduated from Faulkner University, which is in Montgomery, Alabama.
That's a
down in
lot different than
South
Chatsworth, Georgia.
lot different than Chatsworth, Georgia. But I tell kids this, nowadays. I came from a great like home environment. My mom and dad were awesome parents. Just a great family. But the best thing I ever did, was get out of my bubble and get about 4 or 5 hours away from home. And not that I was dependent on mom and dad for everything, but you kind of get out on your own and you start figuring things out. But one thing I did figure out in Montgomery is I learned what hot was. We thought we had some heat, in Northwest Georgia in the summer times, but you get down in Montgomery in lower Alabama and it is a different kind of heat.
Yeah, LA presents some different issues down there in lower Alabama. That is South Georgia down there. You're exactly right. It's a different kind of heat. Probably like up there is a different kind of cold than it
It
is
is.
here.
It is. It is.
I mean, it was 40 degrees the other morning, and I was about to die.
Yep.
And that's probably like a nice fall day for you guys up in the mountains and
Well,
foothills.
it was in the lower 40s this morning at practice, and we looked like we were going snow skiing. Some of us coaches. The older I get, the worse I deal with the cold. I'd much rather be warm than be cold. But it was getting to go there to Faulkner. The neat part about it was I was the first incoming class that started the football program. So to be there for that time frame, from the ground up to you know, not having really anything at the beginning, and then you slowly get your own field house and get your own stadium. It was kind of a cool process to go through, but made a lot of really close friends that I played with, still keep in touch with to this day. Played for some really good football coaches that have helped me, later on down the road. And once I got into the coaching profession, so it was an awesome experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything. We didn't win many games early on, got better as time went, but it was a really cool deal.
So when you were in school, did you always know you were going to teach and coach, or did you want to do something else and got in the wrong line?
No, coach, I mean, from the time I can remember ever being old enough to think about what I wanted to do, I wanted to coach. I think I was pretty self-aware. I kind of knew, the market for playing in the National Football League, getting very good for 5', 11-inch offensive linemen, and two, even not having that ability level. But I knew I just loved football so much. And to me, it goes back to playing for Coach Napier and Coach Ziegler. And, my offensive line coach in high school was, for the first 2 years, was Pete Wiggins, who's at Callaway. And then Steve Sparks was my offensive line coach when Coach Wiggins left. And being around those guys and just the relationship piece, being a part of a team, the competition, I just, from as early as I can remember thinking, that it's all I really wanted to do, which I think is a blessing. Some people go through and, get to college and switch majors or even get into another career and try to backtrack and do something. I never had to deal with anything like that. I just kind of knew what I wanted to do and just rolled with it.
So what was your first job out of college?
First job was at Southeast Whitfield High School in Whitfield County, Georgia. And Coach Napier, I know I keep referencing him, but he had such a huge impact on me as a person, as a coach, and as a player. But he kind of helped get me, in there. And it was during the time frame when there were no jobs. This was 2009, 2010, when there were a lot of job cuts happening around the state. And I was worried if I was even going to be able to find anything. But he helped me get my foot in the door there. And I worked for a guy named David Crane, who had came to the state of Georgia from South Carolina. He was the offensive coordinator at Burns High School in South Carolina, which was a very successful program. And I tell people all the time, it was the perfect first job because it was a place where, Southeast doesn't have a ton of tradition as far as winning. So you had to coach really hard. But on top of that, we cleaned our own field house. We mowed our own grass. We edged the track. We took care of everything. And I think early on, being a first-year coach, that really helped me, develop that work ethic and understand how much goes into this other than just, putting a game plan together and trying to go execute it. It was an experience that really helped me appreciate once you get to some of these other places. And I think times changed where there's there's more places that are like this now, but where you don't really have to, you're not top dressing your game field, in the summertime, and you're not cleaning your own field house, and you're not doing all those odds and ends jobs. It just really made me appreciate once I got to some of those places. It was like, man, we just get to coach here is what it felt like.
So what else did you coach? Because I know as a first-year coach, you wasn't just coaching football.
No, I did football. I helped at that time, and we didn't get paid for it, but I did the middle school strength and conditioning. I've got a background in strength and conditioning, so I did that at our 2-feeder middle schools in the off season, and I was also the assistant tennis coach. And I've never played a game of tennis in my life, but that was interesting. That kind of got thrown in after I got hired, which was fine. I was just grateful to have a job. So I did that, and and tennis, one thing I learned about that is, we get to our first match, and I don't really know what's going on, but I'm waiting on the referees and the officials to show up. And then I learned that there's no referees or officials. It's just kept between the two players. And had some long afternoons at some tennis courts around Northwest Georgia. But that's like, early on in your career, I think it's important that you've got to do some grunt work stuff like that. And I'm blessed. I know a lot of guys get out and, their first job, and we've got a few guys here at Calhoun. I mean, they're coaching 3 sports, so I've been lucky that I never had to do the 3-sport thing. But it was an interesting spring season being a tennis coach that had never, ever played a game of tennis in his life.
Well, how long were you at Southeast Whitfield?
I was at Southeast Whitfield for 3 years. 3 years, and then that was our head football coach, David Crane, left to go be the offensive coordinator at Northwest Whitfield, and which is just on the other end of the county, on the north end, and some things kind of fell in place with some, turnover that they were having at Northwest, and they ended up needing an offensive line coach. So I left Southeast, when he left, and went to Northwest Whitfield, spent the next 3 years there. And Josh Robinson was the head coach and still the head coach there. He's, at this point, I think he's got to be one of the longest tenured guys in the state of Georgia. But Josh does a great job. Very intelligent football coach, great with relationships, with the kids. And was lucky, when I got to Northwest, we had a really, really talented team, had some really good players, had some success. That was in the sub-region days, back when there were sub-regions. And, our first year there, we went 9-1, but ended up being the 3rd place team because of sub-regions. And we were blessed enough to draw Carrollton in the first round of the playoffs. So got to go to Carrollton High School for the first time and experienced that. But Northwest was a really good place. It's a lot like a lot of Northwest Georgia schools, just really, just a kind of a blue collar community. The kids worked hard. It was a good program. It's established. They've been a solid program for a long time in this area.
Drew McIntyre here from WWE. Wielding the Claymore can be a life of chaos. When I'm not dominating in the ring, Chumba Casino is how this warrior takes a wee break. With hundreds of online social games and new weekly releases, there's always something fresh to try. And those daily boosts, next level. Even my free time feels like Valhalla. So when life feels like a battle, kick up your feet, have some fun, and let's Chumba.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See T's and C's. 21 plus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
It was a good 3-year span there.
Yeah, and Josh is good people, too. He's one of my favorite guys in the business, and I've known him since we first started coaching. And, he'd always work Coach Hodges' O-line camp and when he was a young coach. And I'm just glad to see that he's been able to stay in one place as long as he has, because it's hard to do that these days. And
very hard.
And he's done a great job there.
He's done a really good job.
So where did you pile up and go to after Northwest Whitfield?
So I get, like a lot of young coaches, you start getting these visions of, I want to be a head coach. So I kind of caught the the head coaching bug a little bit, and I thought, well, I need to go call plays. I need to go be an offensive coordinator somewhere if this is what I want to do. And it worked out to be a really good situation. So Zach Grage, who I didn't know at the time, had left Colquitt County and had gotten the head coaching job at Gilmer High School in Ellijay, Georgia. So my college roommate, who I played with at Faulkner, got hired to be his defensive coordinator. So kind of had a connection, and we ended up talking. And I just felt, Zach's still one of my closest friends to this day. And I just felt like it was time, I don't know if it was ambition or if it was me trying to push the envelope a little bit, but I was very happy at Northwest and loved working for Josh, but I was just craving a little bit more responsibility being a young guy. And Zach hired me to be his offensive coordinator, and that was my first time, calling plays and kind of running that side of the football. And Zach was coming from Colquitt County, where they had been ultra successful. He was with Coach Probst, and that whole tree of guys that were there that have kind of branched out, and so many of them have been successful head coaches. But went to Gilmer, and it was another great stop. We had a great principal, great support. I mean, some tough kids, and it was just a place that once we got there, I mean, we really thought this may be the spot for a while. We had some success that first year and had a lot of kids coming back, and I was working with one of my best friends, and Sean Tome was our defensive coordinator, and like I said, he was my roommate in college, and he just one of my closest friends. It was just a really cool deal, and I'll never forget. We come in one morning, and Zach called me and Sean, kind of into the office, and he'd been offered the Thomasville job, which kind of caught me off guard. I've never have really kept up with who's in on what job and that kind of deal. And I knew that he had, he'd been in South Georgia, and his wife was from there, but, just being a young 27, 28, however old I was at the time guy, I didn't really put two and two together. But anyway, Zach left to go to Thomasville, and, I really wanted to go to Thomasville with him. But we just, I had two young kids, and my wife is from Northwest Georgia, and our family was in Northwest Georgia. So we just didn't really feel like it was a great time for us to pack up and move to the other end of the state. So ended up staying at Gilmer through, that transition period, and had a chance to go to North Murray High School, which is, in Chatsworth, where I grew up. Coach Pogue, Preston Pogue, had just gotten a job, and he was putting a staff together. So, got connected with him, and the house we were living in was about, 6 or 7 minutes from North Murray High School. So, with Zach leaving and the transition that took place at Gilmer, it just felt like the right thing was to, get back a little closer to home and work with Preston. So left Gilmer and went to North Murray.
Yeah, getting plugged in with the right people when you're young is important. I know our head football coach, Philip Brown, worked with Zach at Colquitt and Thomasville, and they're really good friends. And that whole little group right there, does a good job of looking after one another. And lo and behold, you done got plugged in with Preston Pogue after you got Coach Napier in your corner. You got Josh Robinson, you got Crane, now you got Grage, and you just keep building that network, and it makes a difference.
It does. And that's what, and I feel like I'm getting older now. I'm 38, but, I'll have coaches, ask me, about jobs and this and that. And I do think there's a lot to be said, for coaches that are very loyal to one place for a long, long time. But I also know that it has helped me in my career, to branch out and to work for different guys and get connected with different guys, because at the end of the day, the longer I'm in this, I mean, it's a relationship business. It's a people business, and if you make those right connections, you never know what doors may open, down the road because of the people that you've worked with. And obviously, anybody that you work for, you want to do the best job that you can. But you never know how things are going to end up.
So how was your stay with Coach Pogue at North Murray? I've had him on, and he just seemed like an awesome dude.
It was awesome. It was fantastic. And I didn't know Coach Pogue, before that. I knew of him, but we did not know each other. We met at a little restaurant there in Chatsworth one day and had lunch together and just hit it off real well. And it was really cool. It was, he came in and it was the first that season, that initial season, we went to the playoffs and, broke the record for wins in a season, which North Murray was still a fairly young school at the time, still a young school. But won the first playoff game, hosted the first playoff game. It was just a really cool experience. Had some really good players. And that's another thing. The longer I do this, to me, that's the big key in winning, right? It's a player game. You got to have guys to get things done. Obviously, they need coaching. There's a reason that people have coaches, but we had some really good players at North Murray. Lad McConkey was a ninth grader, who obviously is going on to have an awesome career, at Georgia and now in the National Football League. But there was just a good group. That was a good group of ninth graders. But there was a good group basically in every class there. So was there for a year. And like I said, a few minutes ago, you're young and ambitious, right? And you're wanting to climb the ladder. And, I kind of got the head coach bug. I want to run my own program. I've been around some really good guys, been exposed to some good things. So had a chance at the end of that season, Cahola Creek High School in Whitfield County had a head coach opening. And, me at the time, I'm 29 years old, 30 years old, somewhere around there. I think I'm ready. I'm ready to go conquer it. Go through that interview process and really didn't know if I had a chance. I'd never even interviewed for a head coaching position before, and I knew that, you're sitting out in the lobby, and you're waiting on your turn. And, the guy that comes out in front of you, he's been at McCallie High School. And then the guy that's going after you is, was the current at that time, was like the director of player personnel at Georgia Tech. And I'm like, golly, man, I don't have a chance, but I'm going to go in and attack it. And, you walk into this room and there's about 13 or 14 people in there that you don't know, and they want to hear your plan. So I just laid it out and, some ideas and just, general thoughts on how I think, things needed to be ran. And, about a week later, they called me back for another interview. And, about 2 days after that, they called and offered me the job right before Christmas. So it was really, I guess I was only at North Murray for a semester. And didn't really, I knew I had dreams and hopes of being a head coach at that time, but you don't know when that's going to happen. You don't know if it's going to be a year or 5 years or if it's ever going to happen. But, it opened and, talked with my wife, and we'd been praying about it because, that entails a lot more than just being an offensive coordinator or an offensive line coach. But we jumped head first right into it, and away we went.
Yeah, I encourage all young coaches to interview for head coaching jobs, if for nothing else, just to learn how the process works.
That's right.
Because it's
That's
totally
right.
different at different places. You may have a committee. You may have a 3-on-1 or, like in your case, 12, 13 people in there. You may just be a 1-on-1 situation. And
Yep.
each one's different, but they're all kind of the same. You
They are.
kind of learn how the process works, and you learn, what you need to put forth and what you need to really sell. Because you've only got 45 minutes, an hour, hour and a half, maybe, to try to convince these people to cut loose a bunch of teenagers with you, and somebody that's going to spend a lot of time with them. And it's something that you've got to learn how to do.
Yep. No doubt.
So
No doubt.
how was sitting in the big chair for the first time?
Well, I walked into our first team meeting and, just had left North Murray where, we had, I would say, around 75 or, 70 players or so. And, we show up at the school, for the, they called it a press conference, but really it's a meet your coach deal. ESPN wasn't broadcasting this thing live, on the TV. But, you walk in and there's about 25 kids, that come to the meeting, and you're like, holy cow, this is it. We've got to start building. And, Cahola Creek, I think at that time had been in existence for for 5 or 6 years. And I was going to be the third head coach in the history of the school. So there had been a lot, and they were on their third principal as well. So there had been a lot of turnover initially. But, you know, I felt like the administration piece was settled in, and it was a phenomenal administration. Tracy Martis was our principal, and he was willing to take a shot on a young, guy who really didn't have a ton of experience at that point, but, he gave me a chance, and he supported me 100%, the whole time that we were there, and had a great athletic director named Bob Brotherton, who was a former baseball coach. But, to me, and that was one thing I tried to lean on with people, with your athletic director. To me, you want somebody that's kind of been in the fire before, whether it's been football, baseball, it really doesn't matter the sport, but somebody that's actually, ran a program, that's dealt with fundraising, that's dealt with budgeting, that's dealt with parents, somebody that understands the battles that you're about to fight. So they were phenomenal, and jumped in and was able to hire a really, really, really good staff. That was the biggest thing I tried to do. I couldn't do anything about how young I was, but I thought I can surround myself with some people, with some men that have been there, done that. So I ended up getting to hire 3 guys that were former head coaches, that somehow we talked into coming, to Whitfield County. And ended up that first year was rough. We were 0-10, but, it was coming off a season before where they had very, very, very minimal success. There wasn't a lot of points scored. There wasn't a lot of things that they could really hang their hat on. And we were able to get the numbers up a little bit that first year, get the summer program established. And really for me, it's learning on the fly. I think it's kind of like being a parent. You're not really ready until you got to do it. You got to go through putting a schedule together and budgeting and paperwork and, all those things. And, they really hadn't got a booster club off the ground at that point.
Tyler Reddick here from 2311 Racing. Victory Lane? Yeah, it's even better with Chumba by my side. Race to ChumbaCasino.com. Let's Chumba.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See T&Cs. 21 plus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
There was one, but it wasn't really, there were no bylaws. There were no really elected officers like you see at a lot of places. So got to do that first year. Basically create a booster club, and had 3 or 4 great parents that jumped in, and we said, we've got to increase the funding. We've got to get these kids nice stuff. We've got to get the things we need to run a program. I think that, that first year we had around 50 players. And I want to say, and I can't remember exactly, but our operating budget through the booster club was maybe around $20,000. It wasn't a whole lot. Well, fast forward on down the road, 3.5 years later, and we ended up operating around $85,000 or $90,000. We ended up with around 70 players. So, just trying to pick those battles that I felt like I had a little bit of control over, especially early on, to win those was huge for me. And like I said, hiring a staff with experience, guys that had been through there, been in that position and made some mistakes and done some things the right way. They were phenomenal. And the guy named Danny Wilson was the guy I hired to be our defensive coordinator. And Danny had been a head coach in the state of Tennessee for a long time, was the head coach at South Pittsburgh High School, for a span. He was actually the principal at South Pittsburgh High School when we hired him to come be our defensive coordinator. But he was the guy that, he's won state championships in 3 different sports as a head coach. As girls basketball, a head football coach, and a head baseball coach. So, the guy, he knew how to win. He knew how to treat players. He knew how to pay attention to details. And, I always leaned on him really heavily. But he would let me make mistakes. It wasn't one of those situations where he was, you need to do this and you need to do this and you need to do this. He would always give me his opinion when I asked him. And a lot of times it was the right thing to do. But there were some times where, I may not have went with his opinion. And, after the fact, when things didn't go right, he would just kind of smile at me, but it was definitely a really cool learning experience. And we got better each year, and by the end of that 3rd season, I knew we were close to kind of getting to where we could be a 500 football team, and ended up doing that the next year. but I was just so burned out. I was not a very good delegator with some things. I'm offensive line is near and dear to my heart. So I was the offensive line coach. I was calling plays. I was the offensive coordinator. I was our strength coach, and I was, learning on the job as a head coach. So it added up over those 3 years to where it really, it kind of gets you to where do I really even love football anymore? Like, is this really what I want to keep doing? So took some time to decompress after the season, and I'd been contacted by Coach Reed at Rome High School, about potentially getting together with him after the season, and ended up, being offered a job at Rome, which, at that time and still, right now, one of the top programs in the state. And just the thought of being able to go somewhere like that was very intriguing to me. So ended up stepping down, right after Christmas time, right before Christmas, I'm sorry, and ended up getting hired at Rome right after Christmas.
So you became a Wolf.
Became a Wolf, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And them fantastic facilities, working for another guy that's plugged in, had a lot of success in 2 different states, and stayed up in that area and in another successful program. So how were things at Rome?
That was, to me, that was the first place, and I've been at some really cool places, but that was the first place where, after about my first week there, I thought, man, this is what high school football looks like at its best, as far as, how everything is structured, the facilities, our coaching staff was unbelievable, had some really, really good players, great administration. Like, it was just my first experience at kind of one of the big time places, so Coach Reed was great. He didn't know me from Adam, but I think we ran into each other at a clinic. I'd spoken at a clinic that one of his assistants were at, and had hooked up with him. So, one thing, led to another, but got to come in and just see how he does things. And it was different from, anything I'd been around before. I think there's a lot of different ways, that you can approach, things as a head coach. Some guys are, obviously like defensive minded head coaches, and the offense, is kind of, they're still overseeing the whole program, but they've kind of got a specialty, where with Coach Reed, I felt like he had his thumb on everything that we were doing, offensively, defensively, special teams. Very, very organized, very much attention to detail. The big thing that he used to say, and it still sticks with me, is no stone unturned. Don't leave any stone unturned, with these kids. When it comes to a drill, when it comes to a situation that may come up in a game, where it comes, how we practice, why we practice a certain thing, why we do things a certain way. And, he was a big, we do it right or we do it over, and I'd been places where, a lot of times, tempo had kind of introduced itself into high school football, so it was a lot of, coaching on film, which I think there's something to be said for that for sure. But this was my first experience of, like, if we've got 10 minutes for, our 9-on-7, our inside period, well, if we've got to take 16 or 17 minutes to get it right, then that's what we're going to do. It's kind of like unplug the clock, and we're going to do this until we get it the way it needs to be, and then we'll move on after that. So he was very, very good for me to work for, and all these guys have been. But with Coach Reed, with him, you always know where you stand with him. He's going to be very, straightforward about the way that he wants things done. And, you look at his track record of success, and there's a reason, that he's that way.
Oh, there ain't no doubt. And I'm an old dude that thinks that way too. And I've had to do the opposite. I've had to learn how to teach off tape.
Yep.
Instead of, well, I don't care if we only learn one play today, but by God, we're going to run it right.
Yep,
where
that's
it's
right.
like, we ain't got time for that, coach. We got to go on to the next thing. And I'm like,
got to go.
Oh,
yeah,
man.
I know.
And I was raised to coach on the fly and all that kind of stuff. But, it's different. And I imagine it's just as different when you go the other way. Like you said, when you go from teaching off tape to No, we gonna get outside zone right today.
That's right. That's right. If we can't reach the three technique, we're going to learn. We're going to figure out why right now. We're not going to wait till tomorrow morning and watch it on film. So, and I think both ways work, because I think there's people on both ends of that spectrum that have been successful. But that has carried with me, since then. I guess maybe I'm a little old school, in a lot of ways, but that's the way I prefer to do it. You know what I mean? And it's let's get it fixed right now. If we know it's a problem now, if we have one minor bust on a play, well, let's not stop practice to, correct one thing that we can keep a kid for 2 minutes after practice and fix. But, if we're, repeatedly doing something wrong, like let's fix it right now. So it was, it was, it was great. Not just John Reed, but, Chris Bowden was our offensive coordinator, and Chris had been with Coach Reed at Tift County, and Chris had worked for, Hal Mummy at Valdosta State. He had been a head college coach up north. He had worked out in Texas at the college level. So just the amount of football knowledge that he had. And he was he's one of the best humans I've ever been around. Just infectious energy. I mean, you get to work at 5 a.m., or 5:30 in the morning. That dude has already lifted weights. He's already showered. Like, he is smiling. He is ready to go attack the day. And Wayne Groves was our defensive coordinator, who's the head coach at Darlington. And Wayne was a phenomenal football coach, and still a good friend to this day. And Jason King was our running back coach, and Jay's actually back at Rome now, and just one of the best, just human / football coaches that you could ever find. So made a lot of good relationships there, and still keep in touch with those guys.
So how long were you at Rome before you moved on from there?
So we went after 2 years. Michael Davis, who, was the offensive coordinator here at Calhoun for 20 something years, for a long, long time, had got the head coaching job at Rabun County. And we weren't really looking to leave the Northwest Georgia area, but, I'd worked a couple All-Star games with Coach Davis and just always thought a lot of him. And he had called me and said, "Man, you've just got to come check this place out. Like, come check it out." Well, we kind of brushed it off, and my daughter was into gymnastics at the time. And for Christmas, we had gotten her some tickets to go to the University of Georgia gymnastics, the gym dogs, I think is what they're called. So, we were looking at it. We're like, well, Rabun County's not too far from Athens. So we could, drive across the mountains of North Georgia and stop in and check it out and see him, and then drop down into Athens. So, it was me and my wife and my daughter. I've got 3 kids, but my daughter's the oldest. And, we went and got there and saw everything that Rabun County has, which was a lot. And, I thought, well, this is going to be a tough decision. It's a really cool opportunity. We had been thinking maybe, the good Lord was wanting us to branch out of our bubble a little bit as a family. And before we even got to the Habersham County line, my wife, who was born and raised in Chatsworth and is, never really left, looked at me and said, "We need to come here." And I said, "Do you not want to take a few days and think about this?" And she's like, "Well, we can, but I'm just telling you, we need to come here. This is where we're supposed to be." So, we made that decision and jumped headfirst into that move. And that was really our first move as a family, even, with all the different jobs that I took trying to climb my way up, so to speak. We were really stationed in that Chatsworth, Dalton area, in Northwest Georgia. So this was sell the house and hire movers, and, you're moving 3 hours to the other side of the state away from your family. But it was we talked about it still. It was the best thing that we ever did as a family, was just getting out, and us and our 3 kids, and just going to a brand new place where we really didn't know anybody, but met a lot of great people. And it ended up being a really cool thing.
So how long were you at Rabun?
So I was with Coach Davis up until, the transition of this past off season. And it's, I've learned in this business, there's changes that get made, and sometimes they don't make a lot of sense, but it kind of is what it is. So we were at Rabun for 3 years with Coach Davis, and Ricky Ross was our defensive coordinator, who had been at Calhoun for a long time with Coach Davis. And we we felt like things were going really well. We had a lot of injuries that we battled, especially, our third year there, but we had a really good team coming back. And, we were rolling through the off season, and, you start hearing things, and, then you start hearing whispers, and the whispers get a little louder. And then, before you know it, there's a change being made. So we were there for 3 years.
And that's when you ended up at Calhoun?
Yes, sir. Yes, it was, we were happy, we loved it in Rabun County. And, but, about
How to have fun anytime, anywhere. Step 1. Go to ChumbaCasino.com.
ChumbaCasino.com. Got it.
Step 2. Collect your welcome bonus.
Come to Papa welcome bonus.
Step 3. Play hundreds of casino-style games for free.
That's a lot of games. All for free?
Step 4. Unleash your excitement.
Chumba Casino has been delivering thrills for over a decade. So claim your free welcome bonus now and live the Chumba life. Visit ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
a year after we moved to Rabun, my dad got diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So that was tough, because he was young at the time. I think he was 60 years old when he got diagnosed. So, which is a guy that's in really good health like him, that's kind of, you're not thinking about something like that happening. But anyways, long story short, he passed away during the fall of that last year we were at Rabun. So, my mom still lives in Chatsworth. My wife's parents still live in Chatsworth, and we were kind of getting to the spot where, like, okay, do we need to get back closer to home so our kids can see their grandparents? But we didn't want to go just, if this makes sense, we didn't want to go just anywhere. We wanted it to be a great spot, selfishly for football, but more so for my kids, with the kind of programs and the kind of community that you want them to spend their, middle school and high school years. Because, my daughter will be a ninth grader next year, which blows my mind. And, my son will be a sixth grader next year. And our youngest he'll be in second grade next year. So he's kind of just along for the ride is what we said, but it ended up that Calhoun, Coach Tommy Atha was the offensive line coach here, and he got the head coaching job at Cedartown. And so they needed an offensive line coach. And I knew Coach Stevenson from when, I was the head coach at Cahola Creek. Coach Lamb was still the head coach here up until that last year. But I got to know Coach Stevenson just being in this area. So we had a little bit of a connection. And, he reached out and we came and visited. And, with my dad passing, it felt like it was a great chance. I'm the oldest of 4 kids that my mom and dad had. So great chance for me to get back and be close enough to her, to help out with, her dealing with losing him and just getting our kids back around their grandparents. So now we're at Calhoun, and it has been awesome. This is a really, really good place, and it starts with, it's like all this stuff, man. Like it starts with, who you work for, right? Like our principal, Dr. Allison Eubanks, she is incredible. Our athletic director is Franco Perkins, who is a longtime football coach in the state of Georgia. And then obviously Coach Stevenson, he's as good as they come as a human and as a football coach. And a great staff that, there's a lot of guys here that have been here for a long, long time, dating back to when Coach Lamb really got things launched into the atmosphere here. And there's some former players on staff. So it's just a really cool place, really cool place. And, we're blessed to have some really, really good players as well.
Well, building those relationships over the years and a lot of your stops, and all of your stops, building great relationships, it kind of led to you doing a offensive line coach clinic every year. Talk a little bit about that you guys have going on.
Well, and I can't take credit for it because Christian Honeycutt, who I think a lot of people know, he is one of a kind, and he has helped me tremendously. When I moved to Rabun County, he actually lived in Cleveland, Georgia. He was, he just got into Gainesville as the offensive line coach, and we hooked up and went and had dinner together one night at the Huddle House there in Cleveland, Georgia, and just, we've just stayed in touch and talked a lot since then. But he, there's a group of them, of coaches that, he had kind of put together, and they would try to get together, once a year and meet somewhere. Well, this past off season, we said, why don't we just do it in Rabun County? Come to the mountains for a day. And, it's just a really, really cool get together. And what's cool for me is, a lot of these guys were guys that I looked up to and still look up to, especially when I was a young coach. I mean, some of these guys were coaching me when I was at Mike Hodges' offensive line camp, and now, I'm getting to be in the same room with them, with Coach Honeycutt and Todd Cooper and, John Flaff at Lee County and Coach Winslet at Buford. And, I'm sure I'm going to leave some names out, but just guys from all over the state, South Georgia, Metro guys, North Georgia, that all get together, along with some college guys. James Miller, who's the head coach at Reinhardt's a really good friend of mine. And I think he's one of the best offensive line coaches in the country. It blows my mind that he's not a Power 5 offensive line coach at this point. But, he's part of that group. And Coach Thurn over at Anderson University in South Carolina, is part of it. And we had Coach Jess Simpson and Jeep Wade come up from Georgia Tech and spend the day with us up in Rabun County. And just having a group like that, man, and we're still on a group text together, and we'll text each other and send videos and this and that. But, it's to me, that's one of the coolest parts about coaching is the relationship piece, with the players, but also with the coaches. And it's just, it's not something that we don't sell tickets to it or we're not trying to make money. Like, it costs nothing. We just want to get together kind of in a non-traditional clinic setting where you're not worried about, so much what gets said or who's listening, and that kind of deal, and just spend the day like just talking about, offensive line play. So it's really, really cool. It's a really cool get together. And I think, hopefully it's something we can keep going, for a long, long time. But, Coach Honeycutt is the one that kind of, brought me into that group, and, just meeting those guys and continuing to stay it's made me a better coach. There ain't no doubt.
Well, Cut's one of my dudes, and I can just say that everything I do is his stuff.
Yep.
He sent me everything that he does, every form that he has them look at.
Yep.
The accountability chart, what we're going to do this week, the how he grades it, every single thing I just stole it and put the Dodge County watermark on the back instead of the Gainesville mark on it. And he'll let you. He'll give you anything that you need.
Yes.
To be successful. And that's how that group sounds like to me. And I think that's awesome.
It is. I mean, and I'm sure I'm biased, but I just have felt like offensive line coaches, there's not many secrets that get kept, because at the end of the day, everybody runs inside zone and counter and whatnot. It's about, and this is what I think Cut does a great job of, is, taking ownership of that group and getting the culture. And I hate the word culture sometimes because it gets used so much, but just creating that, that atmosphere within that group, within that room. I think that's what sets some of these guys apart that do such a great job. Because I do think, yes, there's, certain ways that things need to be taught or have to be taught, but there's even some variance in that. But it's how hard can you get that group to play, and how close can you get that group? And that's what the biggest thing when I first met with Cut, I was expecting him to be able to tell me like some inside secrets, right, of footwork and this and that. But it's what he does a great job of, is just getting them dudes to play so hard and just owning that room, and building that culture. And he is free, giving me stuff like he said with you. I mean, I don't know how many young coaches that he's helped out, but I'm sure it's a ton, and I'm one of them for sure.
Well, he helped this old coach, and I know my kids appreciate it because, last year they didn't have an offensive line coach, and they kind of, had a kind of tag teamed it. So I was coming in, and I was like, all right, I got one chance to set this up, and I knew a little bit, and I'd done some things, but not at that level of detail and not having it all laid out. And like I told our head coach the other day, one of our coaches on staff who didn't know who he was, the guys from out of state, and I was like, Well, he's probably only the best high school offensive line coach in the state of Georgia, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
he's got more rings than anybody that I know. So
he does.
You know, and they're at different places. So I mean,
yep.
I was like, he's a good dude. You can call him anytime, text him anytime, and that group that you're with, you know, it all goes back to what you said originally. Relationships. It's a relationship business. Whether it's a relationship with the kids, the coaches, the community, whoever, whether you're going to be a head coach or just a position coach or a coordinator, building those relationships is imperative for you to be successful.
Huge. It is absolutely huge. And that was one thing that, you know, not to keep referencing Coach Napier, but, you know, when I got into this and, you know, I would talk with him frequently and, you know, and he said, just remember, man, this is a people business. Like it's people, coaches and players. And, you know, the more people that you can get connected to and the more interviews you can do, you know, just you're going to be better off in the long run. And it has. And, you know, I've never really tried to kick a door open. You know, it's just things have happened and, you know, you work for a guy that leaves to take another job and, you know, you end up moving on. But every step, man, like the Lord's taking care of me. There ain't no doubt. I've met some great people and got so many relationships with former players. You know, even this year, I mean, I've had 2 different Friday nights. We've had groups of kids from Rabun County that I coach make the 3.5 hour drive over to Calhoun to watch a football game, which made my day, you know, getting to see those kids and just knowing that, you know, you hope you had an impact on them, man, that they would, you know, that they think that much of you, you know, that you helped them in some way. But and I'm getting to the age now where I've got, you know, guys that I coach that are getting into coaching and guys that I coach that, you know, are having kids. So it's kind of, the older I get, you know, the more you realize, man, it ain't about like those kids aren't coming back because you taught them a really cool way to block outside zone. You know, they're coming back because hopefully, you know, they appreciated what you did for them and you did right by them and, you know, you made a difference for them. And to me, you know, that's why God put us on this earth. You know, I don't think he put us on this earth to sit on the couch and just, you know, lazy our way through life. You know, and a lot of that comes from my dad. You know, he was the guy that, you know, he put people first his whole life being a minister. It was never about him. It was always about people around him. And the older I get, you know, the more and more that has gotten into my thick skull sometimes. And it's the same way here at Calhoun. You know, it's been fun coming here and, you know, getting to know these guys and trying to build that little community within the offensive line room where we eat together and, you know, they come to the house and every time we win, my wife makes brownies for them. And, you know, just I enjoy that. And I enjoy just being around the day-to-day, you know, coaches and players as much as I do Friday nights. I really do.
Well, Coach, you sure have poured into kids over your career and made a lot of great relationships with not only the people you work with, but your players as well. And I know if you ever decide you want to get in the big chair again, you definitely will be able to. And I'm just glad that you came on and shared your story with us.
Coach, listen, I appreciate you having me. Appreciate you. You must have been getting desperate for guests if you're asking some little offensive line coach in Northwest Georgia. But I sure do appreciate everything that you do for the coaching profession here in Georgia. And I've made a lot of road trips, you know, going to visit different places over the years, and I always download 3 or 4 of these things of your podcast and listen to them on the way there and on the way back. So it's been some 2 a.m. rides home that I've listened to Coach Lamb talking with guys from all over the state. So I do appreciate it.
Season 7 of Sun Coaches Podcast is proudly brought to you by Titan Sensor. Season 7.
What's up, Foos? Main event Jay Uso here from the WWE. When it's just me between matches, it's day 1-ish. And that means it's Chumba time. With hundreds of casino-style games and new titles arriving weekly, there's always something fresh to try at Chumba Casino. The daily boosts make it even more fun. And have me about to get them all during my downtime. Ready for a fun way to chill out and enjoy a few minutes for yourself? Let's Chumba.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See T's and C's. 21 plus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
If you work in university maintenance, Granger considers you an MVP because your playbook ensures your arena is always ready for tip-off. And Granger is your trusted partner, offering the products you need all in one place, from HVAC and plumbing supplies to lighting and more, and all delivered with plenty of time left on the clock so your team always gets the win. Call 1-800-GRANGER, visit Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.